People who knew a killer. Did you ever suspect they would do it? What happened? A former roommate hit and killed a guy on a bike while he was drunk driving. He drove home from the bar drunk every single day. I've been saying for years he was going to kill someone, and then it finally happened. Did 6 months. 100%. I had a coworker who went from being a really smart and cultured guy to having wild ideas about catching STDs from working with coworkers who didn't have STDs that I was aware of, and started getting really aggressive with certain people. One day, he came in and started taking pictures of the people he had been aggressive with, the last one being me. I told my boss I wasn't going to continue working there if he was, that he made me feel threatened, and I was sure those pictures were for some kind of kill list. She let him go, and after speaking with her boss, we decided to close the store because he seemed like the kind of guy that would come back and do something. I never saw him again, but Googled him every so often because I just knew he was going to end up in the news one day. About 5 years later, he shot up a hospital. Among the evidence found in his home were lists and photos of the people he wanted to kill. It turned out he had schizophrenia and went off of his meds a few months after we started working together. Lizard brain kept us alive for how many years? I say we pay attention when it starts shouting. I was absolutely stunned to learn my older brother's friend from high school, who was the nicest, friendliest house guest when he was over, ended up murdering his 2 kids years later. He was like a second older brother to us younger kids, and lived with us for a while when there was some family issue on his side. My neighbor murdered his 3-year-old daughter and hid her in a culvert next to our house. We had been out of town and came back to the neighborhood being all taped off. We used to meet up for a week every spring with 2 couples. One of the couples were old college friends, and the other couple were co-workers of theirs. We really liked them and their 2 young children. We got together for several years. Then we got the call that the wife had been killed with a hammer in their basement. The scene was expertly cleaned, and police were zeroing in on the husband who happened to be a nurse. He ended up injecting himself with something to dull the pain, then stabbed himself in the heart. We never suspected he was capable of something like this, and we don't know why he did it. I hope the kids turn out okay. Spoiler alert, those kids are not okay. I grew up with a guy in a wealthy area in Maryland. He was an asshole then. Really mean to me after he told his friends he had a crush on me in like 7th grade, and then they made fun of him. In college, he was charged and convicted of murdering his girlfriend. He got drunk, kicked her door in, and bashed her head against a wall. I was surprised in the sense that it's weird to see a guy you know's face on the cover of People magazine for murder, but not at all surprised that it was him, if that makes sense. It was highly publicized nationally because of who his family is. For students in my high school, murdered a 13-year-old boy that caught them stealing a mini bike. When I heard about it, I had no doubt that they did it. None. And they were all convicted. Edit. I just wanted to add that the mini bike had no engine and had an estimated value of $5. I grew up in a very small town, less than 500 people. 3 guys I grew up with and another guy ambushed a drug dealer for his drugs. They called him to buy some drugs. He drove to town, and then they beat him to death. His cousin escaped out the other side of the car, and they were caught within 12 hours. Rumor had it that when they were caught, the bloody clothes and weapons were still in the house. The youngest one was 16 at the time. Knowing them, I was not surprised at all. I always wonder what was going through these garbage people's minds when they make plans like this. All these lives ruined forever for literally nothing. They don't imagine that anything can go wrong. Know a woman, my friend's ex-wife, she accidentally killed a cyclist while driving. I don't believe her story at all. She says she sneezed and hit him, but they were in a residential area where the speed limit was 15 miles per hour near a school, and the extent of his injuries don't make sense for what she says happened. She's fucking crazy. She is prone to emotional outbursts, tantrums, speeding when angry, just unstable as hell. After this man died, she posted all over social media about how SHE was so traumatized and how SHE's a survivor of trauma and how she wants to be an example of a strong woman to her kids. Never mentioned that she killed someone, never expressed remorse or sadness or condolences for his family. And when pressed, she just cries and plays victim and blames him for coming out of nowhere. We think she was arguing on the phone and speeding home. I was a server at a diner, and one of the regulars, Johnny, was a quiet and aloof guy. He was a little slow, but well-mannered kind. He knew the menu well and knew what he liked. One day, he casually mentioned his dad was the original owner of the diner, and that he himself used to work there. After he left, another regular told me he was shocked Johnny brought up his dad, considering he had stabbed his dad to death in a crack and alcohol-induced psychosis. I was floored. It ended up being a very well-known case when it had happened. He had gotten out of jail and was under heavy psychological supervision, understandably. This is scarily close to what happened to me. Small diner. Dude came in, same exact conversation. Boss told me what happened in the exact way you explained it. Freaky. My ex-fiancé was violent with me on the night of our engagement party, and I honestly thought he was going to kill me. No one believed me when I told them. No one believed he'd even be capable of hurting me in that way. I'd been abused in other ways before, emotionally, verbally, etc., and he'd slap me or push me time to time, but that was the first and only heavily violent incident where I was being properly beaten. But his eyes, they were different that night, like there was nothing behind them at all. 8 years later, like literally exactly 8 years later to the day, after marrying the woman he cheated on me with and having a baby together, he murdered them both and is now locked away pending trial. He stabbed them to death, flew to another city, and lived it up in a hotel for 2 days before turning himself in. He'd just left the bodies there in the house, which were only discovered after he was in custody. I can't imagine the scene, and the whole event really shook up our town and community. I thought it was all a dream until his face was all over the news and my phone began to blow up. I found out the day he turned himself in, and as it happens, I'd just arrived for a brief holiday in the same city that he just turned himself in at. Gives me chills. It ended up being incredible timing, as I was able to give my statement directly to the detective that interviewed my ex and ask any questions I needed or wanted for closure. I had so many messages and calls apologizing for not believing me back then, many saying they're so grateful I got away from him, as that could have been me. My mom called me, cried her eyes out, and so thankful she still has me. It was so weird, I felt so numb. I'm glad people finally are acknowledging my trauma now. After all these years, it's helping with closure and healing. But it was hard going through that season of the breakup, feeling very alone, and people treating me like I'm the crazy ex at the time for voicing what had happened to me in that relationship. I'm glad you're still here, and so sorry you went through that horror. It's so fucking tragic how much women are just not believed. It's horrifically awful that another woman had to die for you to have this moment of support and validation. God, it makes me angry. Thanks for sharing your story too. It's really brave. I was shocked. This was a woman I'd let hold my child, was best friends with my SIL, came to all the family parties, and we'd always had a good time when I saw her. She was the caretaker for her mom with Alzheimer's, and I think must have had some sort of mental problem going on for a while, because she smothered her mom and has special charges for elder abuse and the crime involving great violence. She was found wandering the streets, asking strangers to please kill me. When cops were called, they went back to her place and discovered that her mom had been dead for about a week. She had been texting and calling friends, talking about sports, etc., like nothing was amiss while living in a house with her dead mom in the other room until the day she went out and asked people to kill her. I later found out she had also randomly attacked a friend while they were hanging out a few months before she murdered her mom, just laughing and having drinks, and the next thing the friend knew, the woman was on top of her and trying to strangle her. My grandmother said to her children, "If I ever end up like old Mrs. Brown, I'd rather be dead. Please promise me you'll kill me if I ever end up like that." Well, she ended up like old Mrs. Brown, and everyone knew her wishes, but nobody killed her. I think she wished they had. She ended up in care, strapped to a chair/bed, due to her strength and Alzheimer's-induced madness for the last 10 years of her life. I'm totally sure she was fully aware of what was happening. It is actually sad that she had to suffer like that for so long. It's terrible that humans are forced to suffer and end like that when we do so much better for the animals we love. Totally agree. Assisted dying laws never include Alzheimer's or dementia because of the capacity issues, but the vast majority of people want it for that exact eventuality. I grew up in the flat above my parents' nursing home, and it is the most horrendous disease. It is so terrifying to not know where you are or why someone is doing things to you, especially if they need medicine. Even if I could say no treatment for basic infections, if I had confirmed Alzheimer's that would allow me to die with more dignity and less fear. You can keep someone alive physically for so long when mentally it is so cruel. That's so sad. Something similar happened to a guy I went to HS with. He and his mom lived with grandma, who was suffering from dementia. One day, mom sent him to the store. When he left, his mom killed grandma, and then herself. Afterwards, he said he should have known something was wrong because his mom gave him $100, and that was way too much money for what he was getting. Being a full-time carer is very difficult. The stress of being a full-time caretaker is no joke. Compassion fatigue here sounds like it turned into psychosis. Caretakers absolutely need breaks and mental health check-ins, too. This is a very, very sad story. Me and my sister are caretaking for my mom and my brother right now, and nobody understands that fucking stress of it all. Not only is my mom dying, but I have to take care of my disabled brother for the rest of his life. I thank every day that my girlfriend doesn't bail on me because she has every right to, and she's still on my side. I'm sure it's been suggested previously, but please consider a group home for your brother if he still has a long life ahead of him. Absolutely. My mom's kind of nuts, especially in her poor health, and any mention of me not taking him in and making the rest of my life about taking care of him means I'm out of the will, so I got to play my cards right. I don't want to oust my brother, but I'm not equipped for all that. I'm already going to need therapy for the rest of my life. LMAO. I hear you. I grew up in a stressful household with two disabled people, my stepfather and my autistic younger half-brother. After my stepfather died, Mom wasn't coping well, so I convinced her to take a break and visit her older spinster sister in Italy. She ended up staying. It turned out the best thing for everyone involved. My mother got to start over, my aunt got her best buddy back, my brother got access to an amazing selection of European medical, social, and family support services. My brother goes to a special school and group home, has gotten social and physical therapy, and can now play soccer and hang out with his other disabled friends. My mom and aunt can farm off my brother for an entire summer if they want and enjoy their retirement. They like to travel, play cards, talk, drink and eat, argue and drive like madwomen. There can be happy endings for families like us. I always bring this up when people go full anti-old people homes. Some always talk about how easy it was for them taking care of their elderly. Yeah, if they are able-bodied and have full grasp of the world, it's easy. Otherwise, it's a full-time job. I know because my grandma went through it with her mom. And when they have dementia, you also have to realize it's the safer option to put them in a home, too. My father had Alzheimer's, and before he moved into a care facility, we had a number of scary incidents at his house. One time he wandered off in the middle of the night and was picked up the police. They lived in the hills surrounded by forest land. So it could have ended much worse. Then there was the time he got into his car and drove 30-plus miles away because he thought he had a work meeting. He'd been retired for years, so yeah. We all breathed a sigh of relief when he entered a skilled memory care facility with 24-hour nurses and alarms on every door. The real tragedy is how inaccessible memory care units are. At least halfway decent memory care units are. The wait list is super long because a lot of these folks don't have anything physiologically wrong with them. They're healthy as a horse, except for the fact that their brain doesn't work anymore. So they live a really long time, which means turnover is low. They're also crazy expensive. If regular assisted living is $5,000 a month, this can be double that. And it makes sense. You're talking about 24-hour full-time care. There's no night shift. Half the people there have sundowners and are fully awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. So what you end up with is a bunch of families that have to take in mom and dad, despite the fact that they don't have the resources to hire full-time care, and they already have to work to afford the life these days. A lot of them are also raising their kids or grandkids, and that's just logistics of it. We haven't even talked about the physical and mental toll that caregiving takes on a person. If dad is a wanderer, you need to make sure that there's somebody there 24/7 so he doesn't end up 2 cities over. If mom blew through pleasantly confused and is now firmly and confused and agitated, you have to deal with a really mean person in your home at all times, and there's not a damn thing either one of you can do about it. But you also have to protect your kids from Nana, who has suddenly told them that they're pieces of shit. I had one poor woman whose husband would call for her throughout the entire day unless she was physically next to him or he was asleep. She wasn't able to do anything for herself. She couldn't even go to the bathroom or take a shower without him screaming her name at the top of his lungs. The meds didn't even touch it. Dementia sucks. If I get to the point where I realize that I am cognitively declining, it is fully my plan to opt out before it gets to the point where I no longer have that choice. I've worked with dementia for too long, and I don't want to do that to my family, my loved ones, or myself. I was friends with a kid in high school who ended up killing the wrestling coach by shooting him in the chest and burying him under cement in his basement. Turned out the guy was molesting him and his friends. It's been 20-plus years. He's still in prison and was 18 when it happened. He came from a broken home with no one to protect him. The wrestling coach was hailed a great guy, but really he was a predator preying on young men in poverty. Glad the world is rid of him, but sad my friend was the child who made that call. 20 years for taking out a predator that is actively preying on you. That's just sick. Should have accidentally vehiculared the guy, according to comments higher on this post. Absolutely would never have predicted it. Super sweet, super talented guy I knew in college. He had a psychotic break and murdered his mom, grandparents, and the grandparents' carer. Then he walked next door naked and covered in blood and told the neighbors, "I freed them." Edited because I looked up the news story and I had gotten what he said slightly wrong. I had a friend group online for a couple years, and someone invited a friend of theirs into the group chat. Shy kid. Seemed like a baby compared to the rest of us in our late 20s. Someone I was closer to in the group talked to me about him. Said he was lonely and was probably dealing with some heavy stuff. He could use a friend, or maybe an older male role model. All I knew about this guy's interests was that he liked anime. So I hit him up. We made small talk about anime. He recommended me Food Wars. I watched some of it that night before going to bed real late. I woke up a text around noon the following day from my friend who told me to check the news. There was a mass shooting in Ohio. Sad, gut-wrenching even. And then I saw who did it, and it was lonely anime guy. The Dayton, Ohio shooter, Connor Betts, recommended me Food Wars, all casual like, told me to let him know what I think about it. He then woke up the next day and went on a shooting spree. Never suspected I was trading anime Rex with a future mass shooter. He died in the shootout with cops. The whole thing was insanely surreal. I went to high school and was pretty good friends with a guy who ended up doing a mass shooting at a college a couple of years after graduation. This was completely at odds with the person I had known in school, and I almost didn't believe the friend that told me about it. It was so completely bizarre to think about this guy who was quiet and calm and just all around mild-mannered being the kind of person who goes and shoots half a dozen random people for no apparent reason. My ex-flatmate killed a woman he was stalking. He hadn't been my flatmate for at least 5 years at that point, and I was absolutely shocked. He was the typical quiet, shy type. When I knew him, he had a girlfriend, was an IT worker, played games, bored in video. Just seemed a normal guy. I was absolutely shocked when I saw his picture in the news. He pleaded guilty, so I guess that's something. PS and NZ, not USA, for added context. Not all. I looked up a friend from college to see where he ended up and found an obituary and a news story. It turned out his younger brother killed him during an argument just a couple months earlier. He seemed like a nice kid when I met him. Growing up towards the end of elementary school, I would stay the night with a friend. His parents were always fighting, and numerous times his dad said he was going to kill his mother. His mother dared him to do it every fucking time. While it was still a shock, it wasn't really a surprise when he actually did it. I was in high school. His dad murdered his mother, then went into the police station and told them what he did. Sad story all around. Later on, my friend, who I hadn't spoken to in a long time, committed suicide. I don't know how his siblings are doing. By chance, I ran into his brother at one point while partying. While he seemed sort of self-destructive with drugs and alcohol, I don't think he was suicidal. All that trauma, no small wonder the guy sought to numb himself. Local piece of shit woman-beating sucker punch enthusiast murdered an old man in a bar fight not long ago. For some reason, he's not in prison. I worked with a guy who got in a fight with a drunk outside a bar. The drunk fell and hit his head and died. I don't think he went to prison either, but the drunk kid's parents won some type of judgment against him, so they got a big chunk of any income he earned over a certain amount. He was pissed because the drunk started the fight, and now he was being punished for it. He was just determined to never make enough money for them to get any, so he would turn down promotions and raises. He was a smart guy, too. I knew someone growing up who had all sorts of untreated mental issues. I wasn't shocked when I found out. I did wonder if he would have received the help he needed growing up, if things would have ended differently. A relative is a murderer, and yes, he was in prison for setting his house on fire with his wife and kids inside, and he assaulted his girlfriend in the same time frame because she was pregnant. He gets out, and his new girlfriend's daughter just disappears. I remember I was talking to a different relative and said, "Bob did it. That's not his name." And they scolded me and said I shouldn't say that when he's just got out and served his time. Well, guess what, Reddit? It was Bob. My stalker killed the next person he stalked. Yes, I suspected it. But everyone, including my mom, told me I should be flattered. What? Your mother said you should be flattered? I worked with a woman and her adult daughter for about 6 months before I found they had both gone to prison for teaming up to murder their husband/father. I wasn't very surprised because it was obvious they had both had rough lives, but they were also both very petite and friendly, so it was a little surprising they had at them. I know someone who went to prison for attempted murder after beating his girlfriend's husband nearly to death. I don't know if I'd say I would suspect him. He was kind of dumb back in the day and a little bit unstable, but not violent. I was surprised when I found out. His girlfriend's husband. Yeah, that's a tense dynamic. She was 40 and he was 18. She was married, and he was a fucking idiot who got pulled into her relationship drama. She convinced him to kill her husband. Guy I used to go to school with, then very occasionally a drinking partner, killed a squad eye in the pub we had been drinking in. Apparently, the squad eye had touched Paul's girlfriend up, and Paul politely asked him to stop. They were pulled apart and thrown out. Outside, they continued, and the squad eye pulled a blade. Paul took it off him, then stabbed him 8 times. He was picked up in Dover the next morning. I knew he was hot-headed, but fuck. Was sentenced to involuntary manslaughter and got 8 years. Out in 3. What's a squad die? My mother's boyfriend at the time is my younger sister's dad. I may have been too young to remember or realize his ways, but I remember looking up to him as a second father until he murdered my mom. I was 6 when it happened, but I have mainly good memories of him up until that point. That hits hard. Losing your mom to violence is painful enough, but the betrayal of a father figure taking her away from you is just hell. Thank you for sharing this with us. It puts day-to-day crap into perspective pretty damn quick. I am sending you lots of positive energy and hope that you have been able to create the good life your mom wanted for you. Thank you. Some days it's hard when I get to thinking about what I remember of her. It's been 25 years, but I think she'd be pretty proud of where I am now with my life. When I was in elementary school, my best friend's mom died suddenly. A little over a year later, she was at a sleepover at my house for my birthday. The next morning, her dad came to pick her up and told my dad that his best friend had died the night before. I remember thinking that he didn't look too sad, and I would be crying so much if my best friend died. A few years later, it turned out that her dad had killed the mom, best friend, and a few other people for insurance money. 2 of my friends killed a 3rd friend of mine. I still can't wrap my head around it all these years later. You might have read about this somewhere. It was big news. My friends were Ron Baker, Duncan Martinez, and Nathan Blaylock. God, I've typed things out 5 times. It's sort of hard to know what to say. But I will say this. The most shocking thing is that Duncan and Nathan sat with all of us, worried about Ron when he was just missing, and cried and mourned when he was found dead. It was the worst betrayal. You feel ashamed that you knew them, that you should have somehow known. It's irrational, I know, and me and another of our group of friends have endlessly talked about this over the years. How could we have been friends with someone who could do something like that? Not a killer, but I met this rapper called Viper who kidnapped a girl and had her locked in his garage for God knows how long. He's weird and unsettling and currently facing life in prison, right where he needs to be. I never even considered a possibility. We worked together. He lived a few blocks away. He and his wife had an infant, and he had a daughter from a previous relationship. His wife worked second shift for 911. Sometimes he would call me and ask for help or just have someone around. We were 22-ish. I'm 43 now. I didn't hear from him for a couple of months, and we were no longer working together. He calls me one day to tell me his infant passed away from SIDS. It was maybe a month or 2 after. He was oddly calm, and it sat with me weird. He started fundraising for SIDS awareness. It became his whole personality, which seemed understandable at the time. One day I'm out Christmas shopping. My phone wasn't working right. I had a ton of missed calls from him, but I didn't feel like calling him back. He called me again later that night and left a mail. I didn't listen to it. The next day the news is on behind me. The whole time they're describing this horrific event, I'm thinking that sounds like Steve. I turn around as they put up his mugshot. I listen to my voicemail. He asked me to call him and said something bad had happened to his daughter. He beat and strangled his 4-year-old to keep her from her mother. He confessed to suffocating the baby as well. Over the last 20 years, I have considered writing him a lot and asking why he kept calling me, but I never have. He seemed like a sweet guy. I never felt unsafe around him. I was in his home alone with him often and never felt uneasy. It seemed like he loved his children. Good Lord, that's tragic. I actually do know a guy who killed someone. He was in Vegas, won a few $1,000s, was walking back to his hotel with his winnings, and got jumped by 2 guys. He got stabbed in the leg, took the guy's knife, and stabbed him, killing him. He didn't get charged and was only in the police station overnight, answering questions. Edit. And when he told me, I wasn't that surprised. LOL. It fit with the general craziness that surrounds him. I don't think killing someone who tried to kill you is necessarily crazy. It's just survival instinct at that point. Right? I only meant that he's had a pretty crazy existence. He, his wife, and his wife's boyfriend lived together raising both of their kids, for example. He had 2 barrels in his backyard, which he used to say he would use to dissolve bodies if he ever needed to. He lived next door to my MIL/FIL. He would mow a guy's lawn in exchange, not for money, but for twisted teas. Just a character. When he texted me the picture of his stabbed leg and told me what happened, I wasn't surprised. It went with his brand of craziness. LOL. Good old Scott. I won't say his last name. I should check in with him. I know at least 3 people who have killed somebody. I suspect another one, but just because I find him creepy. One killed a guy in a knife fight at a bar. He's out now. I met him afterwards, and I think he's really nice and very funny and would kill you for your cheeseburger. One guy I grew up with, he was always kind of crazy, and it didn't surprise me at all. He got in a shootout with the police. One guy was a really good friend. He got really into meth and robbed and killed his dealer. He got LWOP. He gave off creeper vibes, but not killer vibes. He worked as a print guy at a copy house, so I should have figured. Unfortunately, he beat his wife to death with a bat and was nabbed on blood spatter evidence. Dexter just started airing in my country, so the story got a bit of a boost from that. What the fuck does being a print guy have to do with being killer? 40 years ago, my stepdad killed a likely homeless person because he caught the guy in the act of raping my mom, bashed his head in with a rock, and buried him. It was at a state park, and the incident never made the news. Crazy thing is, me and my sister were there that day and didn't know anything had happened. My husband's aunt got remarried to this guy. He comes into our home and takes a seat on our stairs. I was on the couch, and just his face and body language fell off. I felt very uneasy every time I was alone with him. My and Mile goes to visit them in their town hours away, and this guy kept telling hubby's aunt that Emile was a bad influence. That what would the church think if they saw you at the bar together? Well, turns out that bar could have possibly saved my Emile's life. Hubby's aunt ended up getting drunk as a skunk while they were hanging out. Can't remember where her husband was. At the bar, and she let it spill he was a convicted felon. His crime? He had strangled his girlfriend to death. He only did 10 years, and they let him out. As soon as my Emile found that out, she dipped out of there. Didn't even tell them she was leaving that night. My husband and I were wondering why she came home so early from her trip until she told us that. On the bright side, he ended up dying some years later, LOL. ETA hubby's aunt isn't blood related. It was a you're like family to me now type thing. My bio dad beat a guy to death because he asked for some money. I have a news clipping with a photo of him from the front page of the LA Times. Shirtless, covered in blood, being arrested by 2 cops right afterwards. It happened the day after I was born. He was walking around Glendale looking for a job in the middle of the day, and a drunk panhandler started giving him shit, demanding some money. I guess he flipped out and just went berserk on the guy. Nothing happened. He spent a night at jail, and they let him go. Turned out the guy he killed was already dead. He had faked his own death years ago. He was a known local nuisance to the LA Sheriff's Department. No one will talk about it. My sister and I suspect that the DA and sheriff figured that he just did them a favor. So they called it self-defense and let it go. He was always good at sweet talking his way out of anything. That is the only homicide that my sister and I have been able to confirm. However, he has bragged about others to us. But we think he was lying because that is what he does. He was telling me the story about how he had to murder his cellmate when he did his stint in San Quentin because the warden refused to put him into his own cell. When I pressed him for details, I could tell he was making shit up. I suspect that what really happened was that he got into a fight with his cellmate, but decided to exaggerate it thinking that we would be impressed, scared, or something. There are other stories of his that told of his violent escapades. My sister would find them in old news clippings or police reports around SoCal. We do know that he was very capable of violence. I remember them as child when he would get occasional visitation, rights to see me between stints in prison. Things could go sideways very quickly when he was around. I never looked forward to his visits. Amazingly, they could be worse than where we were being housed at the time. Mostly because they were always nothing but out-of-control chaos. Now switching gears. I didn't know this killer, but I thought I would throw this in here. A friend of mine and ex-coworker from a previous job is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She worked with serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. She told me that he was creepy. She is a bit younger than he was. That was when he was killing people. Yikes. I get sick to my stomach even thinking about him. Dude, when I had my second child, we were a part of a small group at our church. We were all pretty close. We would pass our baby around, and everyone would take turns snuggling her while we talked once a week. I trusted them. I would have asked any one of them to babysit my 2 kiddos under 2 and felt they were safe. Well, there was one woman there that was mysterious. She often referenced something awful in her past, and it was clear the leader of the group knew what she was referring to, but it was never shared with the rest of us. Well, my husband was looking up something else on the internet when he stumbled across what this secret was. She had killed her own newborn in the throes of PPD. I never went back to that group or that church. I was so angry that the leader was allowing her to snuggle my newborn and didn't bother to tell me that she had killed her own. I'm still angry about this when I think about it, and it's been almost 17 years. Absolute bullshit. We had a right to know that. I really didn't suspect he'd kill someone, but I did pick up fast that he was dangerous. He was devilishly handsome, and that always throws my guard up. Then he just proved to be a real asshole, and I stopped moving in his circle. He had a best friend and good buddy, Michael, whom I really liked, and I invited Michael to my NY party in 2009-10. Michael was the life of the party. Just a solid good dude. I didn't get their friendship. 2 months later, Michael's friend shot and killed him. It was really sad and fucked up. The murderer guy, he has already served his time and got out. Not sure exactly what happened. Didn't want to know. Rest in peace, Michael. I knew someone who grew up and lived in a really dangerous area. You get shot at for driving through their neighborhood if they didn't recognize the car kind of neighborhood. Someone broke in his house one night and caught 3 to the back and died. He went to prison for murder in California for reference. And yes, with his gang ties, it was bound to happen. I knew this guy when we were in high school. He only ever had a binder on him, and in the front panel of the binder was the newspaper clipping detailing how his father went to prison, killing several police officers. Yeah, it was bound to happen. Wait, someone broke into his house, and he shot them, and he went to prison? Are you not allowed to use force if your house gets broken into in Cali? That's crazy. I don't even own a gun, but the only reason I can think of to get one is to protect my home. I've known 2 people who killed somebody. One of them was a shock, the other one not so much. The first one I knew was this guy I went to school with. He was a senior when I was a freshman and was on the football team with me. It was a small town, so everybody knew everybody and we're all pretty close, so even though he was a few grades ahead, we still knew each other quite well. Now, this guy had been held back a year or two and had already done a short stint in county for assault. He was a nice guy most of the time, but he also had a really short fuse and would flip out at the slightest offense and start throwing fists. I watched him get arrested at football practice for violating his probation. When he didn't like that, he got tackled and started throwing fists and ended up splitting one of our teammates' lips in half with his class ring. Anyway, a year or two after he graduated high school, I found out from a friend that he had been in and out of trouble for breaking into houses and businesses and stuff, but he finally hit the end of the road when he got into a squabble with somebody on the beach. They got into a fight, then he went to his car, retrieved a bat, and beat the guy to death with it. Craziest part of this story? He only did about 10 years or so, and he's been a free man for about a decade now. Now this one is the shocking one. This kid was several years younger than me. He was the son of one of my dad's tenants and lived next door to us. Very sweet-natured kid when I knew him. His dad worked at one of the plants, and his mom was a homemaker. The kid used to come over and watch my dad, and I work on my Mustang that we were restoring. He was probably about 8 or so at the time. Good kid, he'd ask questions and be very respectful and thought the car, and by extension, we were the coolest. Mom was a little crazy, so I wasn't surprised to learn that the parents got divorced shortly after I graduated high school and went their separate ways. I didn't hear anything about that family for a handful more years after that. I'm on a local community forum at the time, and I see a new report posted about the kid. Apparently, he was 15 years old and staying with his mom, who had taken a job as a live-in caretaker for a nonagenarian on hospice. He wanted to go and visit his girlfriend, but his mom refused to take him, and an argument ensued. He was not happy about this. He waited until his mom fell asleep, retrieved a hammer, and bashed her brains in with it. He then stole a bunch of pills, stole the old man's car, and drove like an hour or so away to his girlfriend's house, where he spent the evening taking pills and fucking his girlfriend. He ended up ODing on the pills and going to the hospital in a coma. When he came to, the police were waiting for him because they'd found his mom, and he confessed. I think he has like a 50-year sentence or something like that. He's going to be gone for a long time.